I never thought a lazy Saturday morning with a fishing rod could trigger a full-blown war with my HOA, but that's exactly how it began. The sun had barely risen above the pine trees that framed our suburban lake, and the glassy surface of the water shimmered like a promise. I had my old tackle box, a cooler filled with sodas, and one goal: catch a few bass and enjoy some peace before the chaos of the work week. Little did I know, I'd end the day as the community's biggest villain and soon, its new landlord. Let me rewind a little. My name's Derek, 37, software engineer turned reluctant real estate mogul. After years of grinding in a downtown tech firm, I finally saved enough to buy into Pinewood Shores, one of those tightly planned HOA-run neighborhoods where the lawns are all exactly 2.5 inches high and everyone competes over who can install the most tasteful holiday lights. Honestly, I wasn't looking for drama when I moved in. Just a quiet place near a lake where I could sip beer, write some code, and drop a line in the water now and then. But apparently, the HOA had other plans. It started with a note. Not even a person, just a folded slip tucked under my doormat: violation, unauthorized use of common property. You are not permitted to fish in the lake. Fine, $150. I blinked at the message like it was written in Klingon. Unauthorized? I lived 200 feet from the damn lake. I'd paid my dues, literally $900 a year to this HOA. I even remembered a flyer in the welcome packet bragging about resort-style waterfront living. What kind of resort fines you for touching the water? I figured it was a mistake. So I showed up at the monthly HOA meeting that week, still optimistic, dressed in khakis and a tucked-in polo, trying to look neighborly. The board sat behind a long folding table like a tribunal of disappointed parents. Leading them was Janet Mullins, HOA president and full-time control freak. With her clipboard and color-coded tabs, she looked like she was auditioning for Dictator of the Month. Fishing is not allowed without prior approval, she snapped when I raised the issue. Lake access is visual, not recreational. Visual? I asked, honestly confused. So? I can look at it, but not touch it? She adjusted her glasses and nodded, as if this was the most natural thing in the world. Correct. The lake is for ambience, not activity. Ambience? I nearly choked. Then why are there fish in it? To create a healthy ecosystem, she answered curtly. Not for your personal amusement. That's when it hit me, this wasn't about fish, or rules, or the sanctity of a man-made pond. This was about control. Janet and her cronies didn't like surprises. They didn't like people doing things they couldn't micromanage. And apparently, a guy peacefully fishing on a Saturday was too wild for their plastic utopia. I left the meeting seething. They weren't going to drop the fine. Worse, they warned that further violations could result in escalated penalties. Janet even said something about removal of privileges, like I was a school kid who brought gum to class. I told myself to let it go. It was just $150. But the principle of it gnawed me like a mosquito bite I couldn't stop scratching. The next morning, I went back to the lake, not to fish, just to sit. To think. But there she was again. Janet. She was walking her ridiculous Pomeranian, and the moment she saw me near the water, she pulled out her phone and started snapping photos like I was a suspect in a crime drama. That was the last straw. That night, I went deep into the online records of Pinewood Shores. If you dig hard enough, and I mean city clerk PDFs and backdoor county registries, you can find the truth about anything. And that's where I discovered something incredible. The lake wasn't actually owned by the HOA. It was owned by a private holding company called Horizon Waterscapes LLC. And that company had recently filed for bankruptcy. I barely slept that night. My brain was buzzing with ideas and possibilities. If Horizon was dissolving, that meant their assets, including the lake, were likely up for sale. And I had savings. Not a fortune, but enough. Plus, I knew a guy from college who flipped distressed properties. I called him the next morning. 2 weeks later, after a whirlwind of paperwork, legal checks, and one very interesting auction, it was official. The lake, the very one I'd been fined for touching, was mine. I remember staring at the deed in my hands and laughing out loud. The irony was too perfect. I had gone from rogue fisherman to lake owner. From neighborhood nuisance to aquatic overlord. But I wasn't done. See, the lake had easements, access paths from the HOA-owned trails that circled it. But with private ownership, I now controlled usage rights. Which meant I could post signs. I could permit or deny access. I could, if I wanted, restrict the entire area to authorized individuals only. And guess what? I wanted. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I preferred mine served with a fresh-caught largemouth bass and a cold beer on the dock I just built, with no HOA in sight. The day after I officially took ownership of the lake, I wasted no time. I posted laminated signs around the trail entrances. Private property. Access restricted to owner and guests only. No trespassing, no photography, no exceptions. I could almost hear Janet Mullen's sharp little gasp from across the neighborhood. That afternoon, I set up a folding chair on the shoreline, dropped my line in the water, and watched as a small crowd gathered near the trail entrance. It was like watching birds hit a freshly cleaned window. Confused faces. Whispers. Phones out. People reading the sign 2 or 3 times like they didn't believe it. I didn't say a word. I just smiled, tipped my hat, and reeled in my first catch of the day. It didn't take long for the HOA to react. The next morning, I found a certified letter taped to my front door, very dramatic. It was a cease and desist from the HOA legal team, claiming I was interfering with community amenities. I nearly laughed out loud. Community amenities? They had just fined me for daring to use the lake. Now that I owned it, suddenly it was for everyone? I called my lawyer. Yes, I have a lawyer, comes with being a tech guy who's been through a couple nasty startup acquisitions. He took one look at the deed and easement rights and said, "Derek, they're toast. If they so much as look at that lake without your say-so, you can sue them." That was all I needed to hear. At the next HOA meeting, I showed up with a manila folder and a cooler of iced tea. Janet's face twisted the second I walked in. She opened her mouth to speak, but I beat her to it. "I'd like to address the board," I said calmly. "You're not on the agenda," Janet barked. "I own the lake," I replied. "I am the agenda." That shut her up. I handed out copies of the ownership deed, the easement maps, and the new usage terms. I kept it simple. I wasn't trying to be cruel, well, not entirely. I just wanted to make it clear, the HOA had overstepped. "The lake is now private property," I said. "You fined me for fishing. You told me it was visual, not recreational. So now, it's off limits. No boats. No dog walking. No kids skipping rocks. No sunset selfies." Someone in the back muttered, "Damn." Janet looked like she was about to explode. "You can't do this. The community was built around that lake." I smiled. "Funny. When I was just a neighbor fishing, you said it was off limits. So I'm just following the HOA's vision. No fishing. No fun." From that day on, Pinewood Shores was never quite the same. The walking trails that looped around the lake? Dead quiet. The benches near the water? Empty. The HOA tried to pivot, holding dryland socials and community meditation circles in the clubhouse, but it wasn't the same. People moved to this neighborhood for the lake. Now, they could barely see it without feeling my eyes on them from the dock, holding a rod and a beer like the king of a tiny, aquatic kingdom. Some neighbors tried to cozy up. Invitations to dinner. Friendly waves. "Hey Derek, buddy, think I could drop a kayak in this weekend?" I wasn't heartless, I let the cool ones use it. But if they'd ever sided with Janet? Banned. And speaking of Janet, her fall from power was beautiful. Without the lake, her vision for the community unraveled. People started questioning her decisions. Her obsession with enforcing minor rules, like mailbox flag height and garage paint shade, started to grate on everyone. By the next annual election, she was voted out, replaced by a new board that was, in their words, open to less controlling leadership. I toasted her exit with a fresh-caught catfish. But my favorite moment? The day she tried to walk her Pomeranian near the lake, pretending like she had every right to be there. I was on my little dock, cooler beside me, pole in the water. As she approached, I stood up and whistled. "Ma'am," I called out. "That's trespassing." She tried to ignore me, chin high in the air. But then she saw the motion sensor light blink red. My security cam had recorded the whole thing. "You step one more foot closer," I said, "and I'll have animal control pick up that yap factory." She turned around in a huff, the leash yanking her dog back so fast he let out a confused bark. I didn't even try to hide the grin. Of course, I didn't just keep the lake to myself forever. Over time, I set up a community permit system, my own version, not through the HOA. If you were respectful, followed basic guidelines, and weren't a past fine-happy board member, you could fish or paddle or picnic. But the point had been made. The people who had tried to box me in, who fined me for enjoying something natural and peaceful, had learned a lesson: don't mess with someone who reads the fine print. And definitely don't mess with someone who can outbid your entire HOA at a liquidation sale. Now, every Saturday morning, I sit by the water, line in the lake, coffee in hand. Sometimes neighbors join me, invited guests, sitting in silence, soaking up the calm. I always smile when someone new asks, "So how'd you end up owning this place?" And I reply, "Well, the HOA fined me for fishing, so I bought the lake and kicked everyone out."